hundreds of us have come together, and we have collaborated, and these are our estimations of the world now, not Europe. The top 1%, 0.1%, which is 4.5 million people, it's not a small number of people, controls 20% of the world's wealth. You get to 50% of the world's wealth when you get to the top 1%. Top 10%, which surely includes pretty much everyone in this room, I'm sure. You got 85% of the world's wealth controlled. There is nothing left for that bottom 5%. Just nothing. You know, there's no dignity, there's no jobs, there's no chance of embarrassing, you know. Maybe the Islamic Caliphate doesn't sound so crazy. I mean, there's no other alternative out there that has been proven well so far. I mean, I'm not for the Islamic Caliphate, it's terrible. But those things happen when equality gets that horrendously bad. Okay. Here's just to make it graphic. Top 0.1%. You add in the top 1%. And here we have the top 10% of the world. And there's one more factor here, and then we can get close to wrapping this up. Go ahead, John. This is a complicated graph, and you're being very patient because we are getting sort of near the end here. This black line is a measure of the combined calculated wealth compared to the rest of the world that the rich nations of the world have. Wealth minus the debt. And somewhere around 1987, it turns negative and becomes more negative. And now is, you know, like almost negative 5%, that the world's richest countries and their citizens seem to, on balance, on reported tax incomes and so forth, be -5. Well, so that's certainly possible. That would mean that the poor countries of the world have that debt, and they have to say, well, you do the calculation for the poor countries of the world, and they're negative too. He says tongue-in-cheek, you know, we owe Mars? So what's the explanation for that? What's the explanation for all this negativity? He says, that's hidden wealth. That's wealth that's in tax havens. That's wealth that no one can find. Or it would be easy enough to find. It's close to, he says the lower estimates for most economists is about 10% of the world's wealth, maybe 8%. That's $4 trillion of wealth out there that's just hidden away and not taxed whatsoever. So then Piketty, he turns to his last point. So democratic societies have to have democratic discussions about this kind of stuff with real data and real information, not starting from the old cliches. What about taxes? What do you get for 10%? What do you get for 10%? You get protection of private wealth. You get a corrupt police force, you get a corrupt court system, you get private wealth that's pretty much protected, and you may get some really lousy public education. Pretty much, and that's the tax level of sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia and so forth. They don't get much. World War I, World War II, Depression happens, and we get in the West and Japan and Korea now and so forth, a so-called social state. What's the core of a social state? Is you get these three things. And then Piketty goes on to say, every one of them needs to be rethought. They're all got issues right now, but is anyone really seriously talking about giving them up as an advanced society? I mean, certainly education is not working as well as it ought to in every Western society. Healthcare is working pretty well in some places, other places it's a little confused. Retirement is a disaster because we're all aging. And Piketty says, as part of the discussion, it's got to be talked about. You got to tell the younger people, you know, there isn't going to be as much because of lower economic growth for you to retire on out there. You've got to save more now. But if you're saving more, that slows economic growth. But you got to do it. But, you know, so you got these really tough issues out there. But he said, you got to have this discussion. He says, go ahead, next one. He says, well, what about this popular idea of just jumping the tax rates on the rich way high? He says, well, it may be an appealing idea, but it's a joke. They're not going to pay those taxes. That money's hidden. I mean, you could get to a system where that might happen, but stop talking about that. It isn't going to work. I mean, you got to figure something else out. What about austerity, he says? we got no graphics for this. He said, come on. When you're talking about austerity, I mean, who is going to suffer? Everyone's got to tighten their belts and everyone's going to, he said, look, if there's no more food to go around, there's no more water to go around, nothing to go around, okay. Everyone's got to share. But if there's plenty of money out there, the idea of austerity is sort of silly. I mean, just redistribute it. So what becomes, he brings this up and he's serious about it. Go to the next slide. He's famous for this, and of course some people, in some of our opinions, make too much of it. He says, how about at least considering a global wealth tax? A global wealth tax. A global capital tax. And of course he says, okay, I know the response we're going to get, we got it. It says, that is a tax on capital that is a global tax. He says, of course it sounds wacko, but so did the income tax in the United States in 1850, and now we've got it. It took 50 years of discussion to get there, but we got it. How about a global, he said, here's the advantages of at least having that discussion. One, if you're having a discussion about a global wealth tax, at least that's a positive discussion. That could produce good stuff. When instead your country says, well, we got to we got to protect ourselves, we got to put up high tariffs, we got to not let as many immigrants in, we got to whatever. I mean, say that's what people were doing before World War I and before World War II. I mean, that doesn't work. If you've got a global society, you've got a global society. Capital moves. That will never work. It's just a race to the bottom. Oh, I'm going to lower my income tax rates. I'm going to lower my capital. Well, the next guy says, well, I will too. So that's a terrible idea. Better to have a positive discussion. It says a discussion about a global capital tax also says, you know, if you got a better idea, great, bring it up. But let me counterpose that versus what could happen if you could really, now granted, it'll be hard to pull off, but if you could pull it off. Maybe most important of all, he wants to make this point. It is an impetus to have this discussion to say, can we just go out and find the darn money? I mean, and if we did and it was publicized, there would be some real interesting public reaction to that. He says it's not hard. It's not hard. I mean, it's easily doable if nations of the world will simply say to the teeny tiny Cayman Islands and so forth, guess what? We've done it. We passed, the Obama administration passed an act that demands that companies with banks in foreign countries tell us how much money Americans have in that bank and what interest they're earning. And Switzerland and Luxembourg said, okay. And if Switzerland and Luxembourg can be brought to their knees, you can certainly bring the Cayman Islands to their knees pretty quickly. And so he says, it is not hard to, we did this after 9/11. We said to these tax havens, look, you guys are funding stuff that is disgusting. Cut it out. And they towed the line for a little while, but not anymore. And he also says, you know, at least if we had this discussion, you might do stuff in between. Like, for example, maybe, go ahead, John, maybe the EU could at least consider a European wealth tax. How about something like this? For your wealth below $1 million, no tax. Between 1.5 million and 1 and 5 million years, how about 1%? Above 5 million, how about 2%? We could make it a one-time thing. Just 1 year and just collect them. What would you get? Well, first off, only 2.5% of the people would be affected. You'd assume the other 97.5 would be for this. It gets you 2% of GDP. It gets you 2% of European GDP. Within 2 years, you would have paid off all European debt. Or you could do whatever else you wanted with it. It says, you know, we did this. Our first income tax is the Civil War. Lincoln, unconstitutionally, imposes an income tax. 3% on wealth from $600 to $10,000, 5% above $10,000. It was unconstitutional, and by 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes, so he could get to be president, but that's got rid of it. It comes back because we're in economic crisis in 1894. Income taxes imposed, Supreme Court says it's unconstitutional, goes away. And then Taft says, look, we got serious problems we've got to deal with. We've got to have an income tax. He has an alliance with the abolitionists, which is really interesting history. And he gets a constitutional amendment. When's the constitutional amendment? The 16th Amendment, which makes the income tax constitutional, is passed in 1913. Just on the verge of World War I, when we're under enormous pressure because of the coming war. I mean, you have these discussions and they don't go anywhere for a while, but just getting them out, people have positive stuff going on, possibly. So go on. I haven't left a whole lot of time for questions. Done better than I thought. It's an incredibly interesting book. Don't read it on your own. Have someone to read it with. It's daunting. It is daunting. He is asking people of our generation to do something which is probably pretty close to impossible. That is to project out to things that we will not accept as real. We've experienced unbelievable economic growth and assumed it's normal. But to young people, this is the kind of discussion that you might be considering having because it will affect you enormously. It's a pretty powerful book. And I think we're almost done, but we do want to, since we're going to have little time for questions here, for anyone that wants to have a follow-up discussion, that may be nobody, but there's no baseball that night, I checked. There's no baseball that night, I checked. We will, John and others will be at the Cedar Room in the Lafayette Community Center on October 9th, and we can talk about endlessly. And thank you for hanging in there. That's good. Likewise with high school students, you've probably been bored to death. But if you want to get us into your classroom, we'll come in. So talk to your teacher.